Thank you. Good to see you all, and now without sunglasses, right? The Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom. That's why we're here. It's awarded to those who have demonstrated a lifelong commitment to freedom and democracy and opposition to communism and all other forms of tyranny. The medal is named for two great Americans who served as presidential bookends of the Cold War. In the 1940s, Harry Truman helped win World War II and then immediately had to face aggressive Soviet and Asian communism. His multifaceted Cold War strategy stopped the spread of the Iron and Bamboo Curtains. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan helped to renew America's spirit and challenge the evil empire in all ways, politically, economically, militarily, spiritually, you name it. Just months after leaving office, Reagan witnessed the peoples of the Warsaw Pact nations throw European communism on the ash heap of history. The Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom is named for these men of moral clarity and political determination. It rewards their kind of dedication, grit, and vision. And Representative Chris Smith is such a man. Elected in 1980, wow, what a freshman class you were part of. I was thinking about, I knew the late Congressman Wortley and also Congressman Dreyer and a couple of others. Anyway, what company you were in and then coming in with Reagan. U.S. Representative Chris Smith is currently in his 23rd term in the U.S. House of Representatives and serves residents of the 4th Congressional District of New Jersey. Mr. Smith is a senior member on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He has been appointed to serve as both the co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission and as co-chair of the Bipartisan Congressional Executive Commission on China. He also served as special representative on human trafficking for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and as chair of the Helsinki Commission. Today, we honor his career of achievements. These achievements, though, are based on what he stands for, what he does, and how he does it. What does he stand for? Congressman Smith defends the vulnerable. He has been recognized for his outstanding work for veterans and against religious persecution, human trafficking, and violence against women. He is a leading voice and sponsor of legislation to improve health conditions, including autism, Alzheimer's disease, spina bifida, and Lyme disease. He also defends the vulnerable and persecuted abroad. His tireless efforts against all forms of tyranny, particularly communism, have been recognized with the Baltic Democracy Award from the governments of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, the Award of Gratitude from Falun Dafa practitioners in New Jersey, a Leadership Award from 6 Uyghur human rights organizations, the American-Hungarian Federation's Medal of Freedom, the Boat People SOS Vietnamese Human Rights Award, the Citizen Power Award from Initiatives for Citizen Power for China, the Defender Award presented by China Aid, and the Human Rights Award given by the Korean American Voters Council. And these are just a few of the many accolades Congressman Smith has earned. What does he do? We could talk about hearings, articles, and speeches, but first and foremost, Chris Smith writes laws. He is a man of the law. Mr. Smith is tied for longest-serving member of the House, and he also ranks first among all 435 members in terms of laws authored. To date, he has authored 50 laws. And how does he do it? Congressman Smith seeks and finds allies for practical, common good policies. He has been recognized by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Richard Lugar Center, and Georgetown University as among the most bipartisan members of the House of Representatives. Chris Smith lives up to the legacy of Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan, two great Americans and principled men of action. With the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, please join me in honoring Congressman Chris Smith as our 2025 Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom laureate. So proud, so happy. You want to take it out? Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Where's Ramon?
First of all, Dr. Spaulding, thank you for that very, very kind introduction and those comments. And to our President and CEO, Dr. Patterson, thank you for your leadership. Eric Bremberg, who I know is here, the former head, he has testified, as have other members of this important foundation before our subcommittee and Helsinki Committee, and of course the China Commission. So I can't thank you enough for the wealth of experience and wisdom and insight you do bring to Capitol Hill and to the country and to the world. Thank you so very much. You know, you go through the laws and the hearings. We've had a lot of hearings. I do believe hearings are ways of exposing and motivating, but I can't do it alone. I start off with my wife Marie. We've been married 47 years. She has been very seriously ill, but she's recovering, so she couldn't be here today, but she sends her best. And I write a lot of speeches, and she always rewrites them, and I love it when I get it back from rewrite. Mary Noonan is my chief of staff, and she does an amazing job. She's been with me the entire 47 years in Congress. 47 married, 45 in Congress. Mary Vigil does a tremendous job, our legislative director, and we're working on yet another human trafficking bill. And in all candor, she's the one who's writing it. She's doing an amazing job on that. And then, of course, Pierre Tazi is the chief of staff for the China Commission. Bicameral, includes executive branch individuals and again, he speaks fluent Chinese. He is a true wise counselor, and we have been doing amazing things on the commission. I want to thank him. Can't do it alone. It's all about teamwork, and that teamwork is with you as well. So thank you. You know, I do thank you for this Truman-Reagan Medal of Freedom. You know, I look back at all the past recipients, and I know most of them. And have worked with most of them and have been absolutely in awe of just about every one of them. You know, Lance Burgess, Elena Bonner. I remember meeting her in Moscow in the early 1980s. Wei Jingsheng. I met with him when he was briefly let out by the Chinese Communist Party in order to procure the world's endorsement of Olympics 2000. They didn't get it. And then they threw him back into prison and almost killed him. And, you know, Wei told me something I will never forget. He said, when you in the West, particularly in America, kowtow and come in sheepishly and talk to the Chinese leaders, they beat us more in the gulag, the Lao guy. That's not the case when you're strong. They know you mean it and you know your stuff. They beat us less. And I've never forgotten that. That doesn't mean we're rude when we have interlocutors that are obviously taking on or promoting the communist cause. But you fight them and you stand up to them. And you do it in a way that hopefully persuades them, at least some of them. You know, Amanda Valladares, I was talking to, you know, what a great man. You honored him years ago. I went with him to Geneva when Reagan wisely picked him to be our ambassador. I was happy to carry his bags. This man, just amazing. He got the first resolution out of the very flawed Human Rights Council of the UN. It was called the Commission then, targeting what's happening in the prisons in Cuba. It's still going on, but without Amanda Valladares, that would have never happened. He was just, I read his book twice, Against All Hope. It was moved, and we've worked on as a team repeatedly to raise the issue of individual dissidents. Dr. Bichette and others nominated him for the Nobel Prize. He didn't get it, sadly, but you know, just constantly raising that Cuba is not a paradise, is precisely the opposite. And I remember meeting with some of the people who actually picked the Nobel Peace Prize. I was there when Léo Chabot got it, and I was shocked, frankly, when they said, "Oh, Cuba, what a great system." I said, "Are you kidding?" You know, it's a communist dictatorship of the worst kind. And when we had a discussion, it went on for about 20 minutes. So, you know, you backed him, and of course I looked at that list, and I don't deserve to be there. Really, this is your poorest candidate ever. So, for all of you that are here hearing me. I'm sorry that's the case, but what a great list of individuals. You know, even a cursory reading of history reveals that far too often the past is prologue. We know that. It's a nice slogan and cliche, but it is absolutely true. Bad history repeats itself. Communism has been and continues to be the equivalent of the bubonic plague on innocent men, women, and children. I love what you said earlier about equating it with the Nazis and with the swastika. You know, we need to say, here's an equivalency. They are egregiously wrong and evil, and we need to call them out every day of the week. Communist leaders and their misguided followers murder, rape, torture, and enslave countless people. And they leave, as you all know, and some of you personally know this as well, lifelong physical, psychological, and spiritual scars on their victims. So again, to you, Dr. Patterson, to you, Elizabeth Edwards Spalding, thank you for your tremendous leadership and that tenacious scholarship compelling us to remember with clarity and accuracy the truth of communism's horrific legacy of abuse and tyranny, including over 100 million dead victims. But also, more importantly, and you referenced this a moment ago, the strive to abolish communism everywhere and everywhere it continues to exist, or where it might reemerge or emerge for the first time. The Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation shines a bright, sustained, brilliant light and brings intense scrutiny and accountability to the dark and often ignored, trivialized, or covered up diabolical deeds of brutal dictatorships. Chen Guangzhen, a dear friend who solemnly was part of the wreath ceremony and gave a great comments at that ceremony, is a human rights defender in a league of his own. Because Mr. Chen boldly defended Chinese women in Lingley from the CCP's barbaric one-child per couple policy and defended individuals with disabilities, both he and his equally courageous wife, Wei Jing, and family face extreme persecution and violence from Hu Jintao. As we all know, and, you know, talking to Katrina a moment ago, she said, where's that movie? We need to get that movie about Chen, and I couldn't agree more. But while he was under house arrest, we all remember he miraculously escaped, making a long and arduous trip against all the odds to our embassy in Beijing. I chaired 4 hearings on Chen Guangzhen, including his famous live testimony by phone from his hospital bed in Beijing on May 3rd, 2012. Bob Fu got him on the phone through some miracle. You know, Bob Fu, nothing stops him. And at first it couldn't happen. We had delays. And if you look at the hearing record on page 30, all of a sudden we had Chen Guangzhen on the line talking about how he wanted to come to America. And he even said, in part, he said so much, I want to come to the United States for some time of rest. It was wonderful testimony. And everybody in that meeting, matter of fact, even the newspapers, above the fold in the Wall Street Journal, Chen Guangzhen making that appeal to come to the U.S. It certainly had an impact. His story is the stuff of legends. He inspires and challenges for all of us to do more to free the oppressed in China and, again, everywhere else. In January of 1982, during my first term in the Congress, I went on my first international human rights trip to Moscow and Leningrad for 10 days on behalf of Soviet Jews. For hours on end, our delegation, it was a bipartisan delegation, heard stories of Soviet physical and mental abuse, systematic harassment, gulags, psychiatric prisons, and an array of seemingly wanton, brutal acts of anti-Semitism. In Dr. Alexander Lerner's apartment, our delegation heard from several refuseniks, including Natan Sharansky's mother, who admonished us to do more for her son. You also selected him to receive this award because his life at that very moment in Perm Camp 35 was in jeopardy. Raise his situation, she said, which of course we did. To a new 27-year-old congressman, however, it was all very bewildering and deeply troubling. Why do they hate Jews? Why the anti-Semitic obsession? I couldn't figure it out. A few years later, shortly after Sharansky's release, Congressman Frank Wolf and I, after working on this for years, visited Perm Camp 35 in the Ural Mountains. The warden couldn't believe that we were there. He's there almost like, who let you in here? But we did have somebody from the foreign ministry with us. But what a horrific gulag, filled to overflowing with prisoners of conscience. And we pressed for every one of them to be released. Many of them did, and After Glasnost and Perestroika had its way, all of them were released and it shut down. During that trip and many subsequent trips to communist dictatorships, I began to grasp Alexander Solzhenitsyn's astute observation that communism doesn't merely believe that God does not exist, it hates him. Solzhenitsyn called it militant atheism. And again, you picked him too. I mean, you've picked all the best. Despite the breakup of the USSR, however, Russia did not matriculate, as we all know, into a democracy. And remember, we all talked about the peace dividend. That never happened either. Today, the KGB's own Vladimir Putin is waging a war of unprovoked aggression against Ukraine. And our hopes and prayers must be that a just and sustainable peace, brokered right now by the president, can be achieved somehow. So we're all keeping that in our prayers, trying to find some way to get there. In 1981, I read a book called Tortured for Christ by a Romanian pastor named Richard Wurmbrand, a true story of unspeakable physical torture of underground Christians in Romania under Nicholas Ceausescu's dictatorship. The Securitate was infamous for how it mistreated people, and he suffered for 14 years. I was moved to tears, literal tears, when I read it. I put it down a few times, picked it up, my wife read it, and I said, we've got to do something. It was in my first term again. I was inspired, and it has inspired me ever since. Like so many, I was inspired by his courage and challenged by his admonishment, because he talked about how so many in the West would go over to Bucharest, and they would stand there with Ceausescu. They would stand there and enable this man who in nearby prisons were torturing people in unspeakable ways because of their faith or because of their democracy promotion. After being drugged and beaten, Pastor Wurmbrand said he was in such bad shape that he even forgot the words to the Lord's Prayer. So he simply prayed, quote, "Our Father, I have forgotten the prayer, but you surely know it by heart." Jesus' powerful and unambiguous teaching in Matthew 25 to see those construed by the world to be the least of these, or the least of our brethren, to be Christ himself, applies to many. Pastor Wurmbrand was a spiritual and moral giant, but in jail, situationally, was the least of these. And we needed to get him out, and thankfully, through a great effort in Congress and around the world, he was finally released, as was his wife. On a trip to China in 1994, I had the awesome privilege of meeting with Bishop Xu Zhimin. Bishop Xu is a leader of the underground Catholic Church. As he spoke and then prayed, the bishop prayed for his persecutors. He prayed for the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, not himself. He prayed for mercy for them, even though he had suffered so horribly, beaten, starved, tortured for some 40 years in the Chinese gulag. Yet he was just, it amazed me. I get mad when I get a bad editorial. I get a lot of them, and some bad press. Here's a guy that had suffered, taken away from his ministry that he loved so much, and he was praying for his tormentors. Love those who hate you as Christ did from the cross, he said. Do good to those who persecute you. For Bishop Xu, these were not mere words. It was his faithful and faith-filled response to one of our Lord's most difficult teachings, and that is, love your enemies. Unfortunately, only a few years later, he was arrested again and disappeared. We wrote over and over again to Xi Jinping. We wrote to the embassy. Where is he? We did a hearing in 2020. Where is the bishop? And of course, crickets. We never heard a thing back from the Chinese Communist Party. Like many of you in Congress and in the Trump administration, we will continue pushing for the release of Jimmy Lai as one of many great, great people who has been, and other Hong Kongers who have been unjustly imprisoned. I shared a hearing that featured his son, Sebastian, and I have to tell you, he was a chip off the old block. He was he just wowed everybody. He was just loves his father and wants him free. And again, Chinese Communist Party under Xi Jinping just turns the other, and now is, he probably will spend the rest of his life in prison under that draconian national security law. As you all know, in 2014, Xi Jinping labeled the Uyghurs as terrorists and told high officials to wipe them completely off the map, destroy them root and branch, he said. We have the documents. And here's a guy that was going simultaneously before the Olympic Commission saying how we want the Olympics and we will adhere to human rights, while they will simultaneously planning a genocide as they did against the Tibetan Buddhists, against the Uyghurs. In one speech, he says the weapons of the People's Democratic Dictatorship, he calls himself a dictatorship, must be wielded without any hesitation or wavering. And he also said, show absolutely no mercy in dealing with Uyghurs and other Muslims. As we all know, Xi is trying to obliterate Christianity, Tibetan Buddhism, and Falun Gong practitioners, especially through synodization, jailings, and other means of persecution. I will conclude. You all know this. I'm talking to the choir, talking to courageous men and women who fight for this every day. But the global tide, there's a rising tide of global repression, and it is startling. In many places of the world, it is getting demonstrably worse. From Cuba, as we talked earlier, I mean, Cuba is not turning towards democracy. I had a hearing when Elian Gonzalez was arrested by our government and sent back forcibly. I had the only hearing on Capitol Hill on Elian Gonzalez. Mario Diaz-Balart, God bless him, he's passed, but he was just like Mario, such a great leader. He came to my hearing. He wasn't on the committee, but I said, please, Mario, we need you. He came. We had a Reverend Walker from New Jersey who got up there and talked about how he goes to the prisons. And so I said, well, do you visit the political prisoners? You know, because he said his favorite scripture is Matthew 25. When I was in prison, did you visit me? So I said, well, did you go and talk to political? Mario goes, well, the gentleman yield. You know, he had a very good, powerful voice. I said, of course. He leans forward, almost falling out of his seat, and says, name one prisoner that you've ever met with, Reverend Walker. And he couldn't. And next thing you know, he's looking at his watch and he's leaving because he had to make a plane back to Newark. It just underscored the hypocrisy of the other side on so many. Nicaragua, yeah, they arrest Bishop Alvarez and all of the opposition. You know, Frank Wolf and I and Tony Hall met with Ortega in 1994 when he was Commandant Ortega, argued with him on human rights, got nowhere, sadly, and saw the man for who he was. By his deeds, we knew him as well. Well, what he's done to the church, to all people of faith, and to that democracy is absolutely appalling, and we need to do more there. Venezuela, Brazil, look at Iran, North Korea, Vietnam, our good friends of Vietnam. 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon is coming up. A very, very grim reminder of when the communists took control there. And, you know, we're going to reintroduce the Vietnam Human Rights Act. We're going to do it next week again. It's passed the House 3 times and got over to the Senate, and it got holds on it. You know, people, it's a country. It's not a, you know, it's not a what? It's not a war. And I said, you're waging war against your own people, journalists, you know, the Hmong and so many others. I'll finish up. But we got to raise that. We got to raise that really, really strongly, you know, because sometimes Vietnam or some other country will do something that we find favorably diplomatically, and then we look askance when it comes to their abuse of human rights, and that's just can't do it. Belarus, we're going to reintroduce the Belarus Democracy Act. I've gotten it passed 4 times and into law. Lukashenko called me public enemy number 1 at a face-to-face meeting we had with 11 other members. Matter of fact, we got our tea as he said that. I pushed mine over to my colleague. I said, you can drink my tea. I mean, he is a monster, just like Putin, and we need to speak out even more so. Finally, we must never quit. We can't grow weary in the defense of human rights, and justice need not be forever because so many are depending upon us. Thank you so very much.